Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and hands-on learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. My name is Sylvan and I will be your host. Today we are in a huge UBS building. In Altstetten there are probably several thousand people working, but the corporate spirit only hit us at the entrance and the security gates. For the interview with Verena Kaiser, we go to the in-house innovation lab, where there is a creative and startup-like atmosphere. Verena is head of direct investment at UBS and has already accompanied numerous well-known startups in their search for capital, including, for example, the eyewear startup View. We talked to Verena about later stage fundraising and shed light on the process, the requirements, and the choice of the right investors in this exciting area. One more thing. About to start your own business? Cool. Congratulations on taking the plunge. We're excited to hear your new business idea. With UBS Start Business, you can start your own business in 6 easy steps. Our starter kit includes tips and attractive offers. Save money with our free capital deposits account, business account, and prepaid card. And our new startup service lets you delegate all the administrative effort. What insurance do I need? Where can I find great co-working spaces? Find out more today at ubs.com/startbusiness. Verena, a very well welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's great to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
Today we're going to talk about fundraising for growth. We do a Q&A on that topic. And the first question that we have is, what is the difference between fundraising for growth versus seed financing?
So fundraising for growth is obviously the stage of the life cycle the companies are in is more advanced. So they're already commercialized. They generate sales with a diversified customer base, not only with the early adopters, but also the ones that use the product, the service, for a longer term. So you have recurring customer base.
What does that mean in terms of like sales? Is there a certain amount of sales that you need to have in order to be eligible for growth?
So move towards 1 million of sales with a diversified customer base. I think that's very important because in IT, for example, you could have one project with 1 million of sales. Exactly. So it should be really a diversified customer base with whom the companies generate the sales. Mm-hmm.
And when you're in this process of, getting started in fundraising for growth, when should you actually start with the fundraising process?
So I always tell the companies they should start early on, meaning have a good 12 months of cash run rate still available, because it's a very uncomfortable situation if you're in fundraising, which usually takes longer than you expect, and then you run out of cash. So it's a very uncomfortable situation. So really have enough cash still available for you to be comfortable in your fundraising round.
And in order to get ready for such a fundraising, some people call it like transaction readiness. How do you get ready to actually go and fundraise for growth as a startup?
So to be in a position to do fundraising in a growth stage, at least with us, is you have to have around 1 million of sales with a diversified customer base. Mm-hmm. They should be ideally recurring customers and not really the early adopters, but really a good basis. And ideally we find some good names within your customer base. I want to see a solid management team with diverse backgrounds that really divides the task according to their capabilities and not really has all responsibility within one person. Obviously, we want to see a clear growth strategy and a clear path of achievements that have been reached today. And also the way on how to reach profitability. So in growth stage, I really want to see, in near to midterm, that companies reach profitability and how they plan on further scaling. And you really talk about the transaction readiness. What that means for me is how do I get ready for the fundraising, meaning do I have all my documents ready? So a business plan, financials, are they in line with the strategy? Mm-hmm. My valuation, is it thought through? Can I really defend it if an investor, asks these questions and is trying to negotiate? Right. All the requirement documents, for legal, commercial, financial, and tax due diligence. And obviously, to really be prepared that you can start the fundraising.
There really is a lot of work to do.
Yes, there's a lot of preparatory work to do, but it's definitely worth it, because investors will appreciate it if you have sound and good documentations ready with hopefully no mistakes, and that will give trust in you that you do a proper job.
So once you actually achieve that status, how does the fundraising process for growth actually look like? Like, where do you start?
So how we start is usually startups approach us through different channels. We have a huge network, so either they're recommended by other startups to us, or they come through a network partner, they contact us directly, or go through their client advisors within UBS. And then we usually review the business plans first. So I would say up to date, we've seen more than 2,000 business plans. And we want to get a first feeling of what we think the company is doing. And then, probably more than 50% of those we've met actually in person, because we wanted to understand, what's the team like, the team structure, and hear in person what their growth story is or what they tell about their startups.
Right.
So I think that's the first two steps. And after we've met the companies, then I would say it's a decision. Do we think it's a company that has promising growth path in front of it, and can we do successful fundraising for it? And if yes, we go into, I would say, a review phase or soft due diligence, in which we dig more into the details. We wanted to understand more, the financials, the growth plans, the competition, the market, so the entire picture, to make an informed decision. If we think yes, we go to our committee internally, we present it and get our approvals to then show it to our investor base. And our investor base, I would say, is threefold. So on one hand, obviously, our USP is, as the largest wealth manager, is the private investor base. So the family offices of the world, C-level management, and so on and so forth, VCs, and obviously strategic investors. So that's, I would say, in a nutshell, how the process looks like within our direct investment team.
I think you have a very broad experience. You also worked with very well-known startups like View, for example, or also Ava. So I would also like to look at the process from a startup perspective. So what does a startup need to achieve or to work on in terms of the process? I can imagine it probably starts with the research of potential investors and also preparation of documents. Can you talk about how that works and what you need to get ready there?
Yeah. So looking back at the companies we supported in the past, and you just mentioned two of them, like Ava and View, but to give you a bit of the feel, we also supported On, Best Mile, Farmi, or in the life science space, in Sphero and Cutis, and many others. The preparation of the process pretty much looks the same for each and every one of them. The key item for me, before you actually start searching for your investor base or define the investors you wanted to approach, is actually the equity story. It needs to be an attractive and compelling stories the startups should have available. It reflects the rationale why the investors should actually invest in the company. And in addition, what are your achievements to date? What makes you stand out versus others in the market? How you differentiate yourself? How do you plan to scale and excel, etc.? So the equity story is really the story you want to tell to convince investors to invest in you. So before you, and maybe this goes in parallel, when you set up your equity story and you prepare all your documentation that you then need, like the business plan, your financials, all legal documentation you need to have ready, IP materials, supplier contracts, contracts with large clients, etc., etc. To start this process, you need to get all this documentations and the story ready. But the other important piece is to define your investor group. And to see what kind of investor will actually be the right one to help you during your next growth phase. What actually do you want to achieve? Is this you want to scale, you want to excel, you want to expand into different countries? You might need someone that has experience exactly in this field, as an entrepreneur that has already done the next steps you wanted to do. Are you envisaging an exit in 2 or 3 years' time? Then you maybe look for a totally different type of investor that really helps you get ready for exit. So first of all, get your story ready, get ready where you want it to be in the next years, then define the investor base you're actually looking for, so you can start actively searching for these type of investors.
And then it's also a question of reaching out to the right investors. So how do you as a startup determine or find the right investors that actually fit well to your story and your growth case that you want to build?
I think it's important when you think about your next growth phase. So you look for a certain amount of fundraising, and you look for 5 or 10 million, 20 million, and you determine how you would like to invest your proceeds. So you have certain milestones or achievements you wanted to achieve during the next growth phase, and that determines what type of investor you're actually looking for. Are you looking for a VC type investor, maybe also an international one, or are you rather looking for a family office or a private investor that brings in other type of network know-how that he or she has due to her career, existing positions, past positions. You really need to determine first what's your next growth phase and what's actually the right investor for this growth phase.
Is there an example where you would say for that case, this investor makes more sense than the other and vice versa?
So maybe let's take a step back first and quickly look at least high level at the differences between the investors. So a VC, for example, has a set fund life, which is usually between 10 to 12 years. They build a diversified portfolio of multiple early stage companies, which should help the VC to reach the targeted return that they promise their investors. Sure. So the VC definitely is focusing on achieving the returns for their investors. Therefore, the VCs will only hold the startups for a certain period of time, and obviously wants to exit to achieve its returns. In addition, a VC, will bring in more conditions along, like with board seat, maybe liquidation preference, etc., etc. So that's really the VC type. When you look at family offices, I would say private investors, on the other end, they have more or less an indefinite investment horizon. I'm not saying that they would like to stay with the startups forever. They also want to see when the exit will come to realize their returns. But the investment horizon definitely is longer. Usually, out of my experience, the private ones or the family offices, they have a strong entrepreneurial DNA. So a specific expertise in a specific area or a specific domain, and will more likely act as a sparings partner alongside the startup, and besides bringing on capital, additional value add. They don't necessarily want to sit on the board. Some want, some not. So it really depends. Versus a VC will always have a board seat. But the family offices or the private one will always be really a valuable partner. So really just to set the scene on a very high level, what's the difference between the family offices and the VCs? But coming back to your original question, I think it very much depends on the startup. And obviously the phase that a startup is in, what we have already talked about today. If as a next step, as you said, you envision an exit, maybe the VC is the right partner, because the VC knows how to accompany the startups and how to make them ready for an exit. So maybe a VC is then the right partner. Not saying a family office would not be capable of doing so, but obviously that's the experience a VC has. And on the other hand, if you really look to accelerate your business, expand in certain areas, you need very specific know-hows and network, then maybe, the family office or the private investor is actually the right one to successfully help you to achieve your goals.
Absolutely.
What's very important, and maybe I want to mention this at this point in time as well, is you as a startup always have to bear in mind that your investor base signals a certain message in terms of reputation to the outside world. So it will give you credibility and a certain belief that you will be able to achieve your goals that you set yourself. And so you really have to carefully select your investor base. Obviously, sometimes it's not so easy, but you should carefully really select your investor base, because it will send a certain message to the outside world. And also in next rounds, when you really do fundraising, again, then new investors will definitely take a look at your existing ones, and are these reputable ones? Do you think, do you feel good in being investors alongside them? So I think it's very important to choose the investors carefully.
And then actually, how do you get in touch with these investors? I think that's also something where you support the startups with, right? So how does that work? Do they get in touch over a phone call? Do they have a meeting?
So what you just said is correct. My team, the direct investment team, we support, growth companies in Switzerland to get access to private investors, VC, or strategic investors. When it comes to my team, the largest USP obviously is that we can open our very unique and large network of investors to the startup at one point in time. And it's specific to the private investors. That's a tremendous value add, as some of them, they're not accessible otherwise. Some family offices, they're known in the market, but most of them are not, and especially not the private ones. And so as the largest wealth manager, we have long-standing relationships with former active, C-level management executive, family offices, entrepreneurs that we can really access for the startups at one point in time. If also wanted from the startup, we have proprietary relationships to VCs and strategics, and depending on what group of investors they want to target, it's either a mixture or really targeting one group. This is what the support we can offer to the startups. And to your question, how does this actually work in this getting in touch phase? We get in touch with the investors that we have defined with the startup beforehand. So is it private? Is it a combination of private and VCs? Okay. And they will receive a non-confidential teaser, and if they have, if they have more interest, they will obviously then dig more into the details, do their first review, due diligence, and then obviously the startups, they get the opportunity to pitch in front of the clients. We always prefer and highly recommend in-person conversations between the startup and the investor, because you feel much more, would there be an opportunity to work together? Do we actually, let's say, like each other?
Will we the energy, right?
Exactly. If you can, and you as an investor, I mean, you can much better feel the energy of the company as well. So I think it's very important to have the in-person discussions, and that's actually what we're really trying to push for, that there are the in-person meetings.
Also, in terms of negotiation that you just talked about, can you walk us through how the negotiation process looks like? Because that's something that usually happens behind closed door, and people who have never sat on a table or been involved there would like to know how that actually also works.
So maybe quickly to our process, because there are two sets of scenarios. If we help startups find private investors, so as I just said, entrepreneurs, family offices, we as UBS sit right in the middle of our two client groups. So the startup on one hand and the private investor on the other hand. Mm-hmm. So when we have these kind of situations, my team has to step to the sideline when it comes to negotiations and then, final agreements, as we sit right in the middle of these two client groups and we don't want to get in any conflicts. Obviously, in the second scenario is when we advise startups, and then can really take the side of the startup to find VC investors or strategics, because then we don't have this conflict of interest between these two clients. Mm-hmm. And then obviously we can support them during the entire process. So after, I would say, a first due diligence, meetings, going through the data rooms, you will have a term sheet. It's a non-binding agreement that's really setting forth the basic terms and conditions under which this investment will take place or will be made. So you'll have the valuation, amount of investment, like the percentage that will be invested, voting rights, etc., really just to name a few, that investor and company agrees upon. And after the term sheet has been set and signed, there will be confirmatory due diligence. Depending a bit on the investors, then they take external advisors on board for tax, legal, commercial, financial diligence. Depends a bit on what the investor does internally or externally. Okay. And in parallel, negotiations of the final contracts take place. So like shareholders agreement and investment agreement, etc. So when it comes to these negotiations, it's not only coming down to the valuation, but it really comes down to a variety of items that is negotiated between an investor and a startup. What not only relates to the current situation, how do I enter into this company, at what valuation stake, but also how do we work together going forward. What happens if situations are not going well? Maybe in VCs like to work with liquidation preferences so that they, secure getting their money out first in certain situations, etc., etc. So it's really, you need to make sure when you negotiate that a combination of items are fine with you as a startup that you need to negotiate. You need to watch out for them. It's not just the valuation; it's really a variety of items that you need to look at. And obviously, I would recommend to have a lawyer besides you. And in such a case, when we advise, we can obviously also help with our experience guiding the startups through the process.
Also, in terms of negotiations, is there any certain percentage that you see that companies give up for in terms of equity in order to get the growth financing done, or a certain range?
I would say, as a rule of thumb in growth financing rounds, founders probably give up between 15 to 25% of the round for the financing needs. It doesn't really differ much from seed to growth stage rounds, because it's usually 15 to 25% what founders have to give up.
So now the negotiation part is done. You have the parties that sort of agree, okay, this is the term sheet. You mentioned that there's a next, the last due diligence. What happens there? So
it's really confirmatory due diligence when the VCs bring in other advisors, like financial advisors or legal advisors, that really dig more into the details and confirm of what they have done, previously. And then it's, sometimes there will be some negotiations or adjustments on valuations if some things came up, that haven't been seen before.
Do you have an example for one thing that came up, for example?
A variety of things can come up, and the deal breaker must not only be on the investor side. So, for example, during final due diligence, patent protection is not as strong as it appeared in the first place, or, don't even belong to the company as it was previously assumed. Sometimes competition is underestimated, and therefore your market share might be lower than what has been previously expected. Right. The valuation might come down, and then obviously you as an owner or founder do not agree, with what will be renegotiated, and then these kind of things could be deal breakers that come up. Why a deal might not take place.
Luckily, it doesn't happen that often. So after the successful due diligence, you move to the signing of the documents, to the closing. What happens there? What do you sign? What are the next steps? And when do you actually also get the money as a startup?
So again, have a good legal advisor with you. But you have subscription documents where, the investor subscribes for a certain amount of shares, depending if you have one investor or multiple. You have your shareholders agreement. So maybe it's a newly negotiated one, or you just use your existing one and the new investors just accede to the shareholders agreement. So these will the kind of documents that obviously need to be signed, amongst others. And then you get a capital increase account. All investors put money into this capital increase account. And once your capital increase is registered with the commercial register, then the money will be released onto the account of the company.
Is it normal that all the money gets sent to your company at once, or does it also happen that you have to achieve certain milestones or anything like that to get the second or third tranche of such a fundraising?
So it sometimes obviously depends on your negotiations. So maybe in the case of life science companies, we have sometimes seen that you have a commitment today, and if you reach certain milestones, then it triggers another payment at a higher valuation, for example. But it must not only be with life science companies; it can also be with other type of companies. Okay. Yeah. So only after a certain milestone get another payment, but usually the valuation is then also a bit higher.
Okay.
So financing amount of use of funds should be in line with your business plan and the cash flow statement. So you need to determine how much money you need to reach your next key milestone, or, for example, profitability in the next, let's say, 2 or 3 years. Right. I would recommend you define scenarios and have a flexible range of capital requirements. So what is the minimum you actually need to continue your growth or accelerate your growth? And but what could you also achieve with more money, and what does it mean in terms of dilution for the founders? You might find a shareholder that would like to take a larger stake, or have multiple shareholders that you would want to take on board. So maybe in that situation you could have a scenario available what you could do with more money than you originally planned. I would say raise a bit more than what you need. Fundraising takes a lot of management attention and obviously a lot of focus away from the operating business. So I would really recommend, I would not recommend that you do fundraising each year, but rather have it for a longer period of time and a bit of buffer, so that you can focus on your operating business.
Yeah, because usually it also takes longer to get to the milestone that you set for yourself, right?
Exactly. Usually that also takes longer, and so if you have a bit of buffer available, that's also well. I mean, if we just look at the current situation that we have with the COVID-19 topic, I think many startups would be happy to have taken a bit more buffer into their liquidity than they actually have.
Now we talked about the whole process from beginning to the end, but how long does that actually take? On average, how long do you need to calculate for a successful fundraising process?
As I said in the beginning, it's very important that you have still, a good 12-month cash run rate, because we have experienced that fundraising rounds usually take longer than expected. I would say on average, they can take 6 to 8 months. Mm-hmm. The quickest one we had was 3.5.
That's really fast.
And that's really fast. And obviously, the longest one I think took 10 or 11 months. So it really, you never know what's happening during your process. So really on average, you should really take into account 6 to 8 months just to be on the safe side.
And then have a safety net of additional
Definitely.
6 to 4 months, right?
Or you have a great customer base investor base that will bridge until you have the new investors on board.
Sure. But then you're always in a demanding situation, and it's not in your full own control, right?
That's true. But if you have support from your investors, we've also seen that, existing investors, and they look, we bridge, we will participate anyways in this round. So we'll put a convertible in, for example, convertible loan. And, once all the others are on board, everything converts and that round is done.
Would you say that this is something that the majority of the startups that you work with do, or is that more like an exotic case?
We've seen that.
Okay, so
I wouldn't say it's the majority, but we've seen that.
Okay.
If fundraising takes longer, or started too late or whatever, then they have a good investor base. But I wouldn't say it's the majority.
Okay.
So.
Now, fundraising is also a very intense and time-consuming process. Mm-hmm. Who in the company should be responsible for managing the whole process from the company side, from the startup side?
So depending a bit, on the setup of the startup, if it's rather still a small team or a larger team, but it's a CEO and the CFO. So a combination of both. So maybe CFO runs the process, but the CEO needs to pitch. Yeah. It's usually a combination of both. The board of directors, the board supports, or the investors support with their network and finding new other investors as well. But obviously CEO and CFO usually run the process.
Okay. And also a very important question is, how much money should you raise? So you should start when you still have more money left than for 12 months. But how much should you actually raise that you don't have to raise the next month again?
For us as UBS, it's important to support the startups and the entrepreneurs very early on, and become a sparringspartner on the wealth management, but also corporate relationship side over the life cycle of the company. And obviously the entrepreneurs. So direct investment, my team, is one puzzle piece in this entire journey that we really want to go with the entrepreneurs and the companies. Mm-hmm. For our support, we usually take a success fee, which is based on the volume we successfully raise for the company. So for example, if we really bring together companies looking for capital with our private investors, this will be on a success fee basis only. Okay. If we get on the advisory side, meaning we really support a startup and finding a VC or a strategic and advise the company, prepare all the materials and do a lot more pre-work, then we will mostly also work with retainers.
And also, what is actually the advantage of working with UBS on such a process? Because it's very intense, very time consuming, and you seem to be a good sparring partner for startups and entrepreneurs. But what is the actual advantage? Why should a startup work with you on the fundraising for growth part?
So it has really various components to me, and probably summarizing what I have already mentioned during the last minutes is. On one hand, we've seen quite a lot of startups, met quite a lot of teams, work with them over time. So we really, can give them a good guidance on how to properly prepare for the fundraising, make sure that every documents are ready, and then also prepare them in terms of pitching. Because if you're a former researcher and now you're an entrepreneur, you might not be the sales guy. Right. So you really need to switch heads and make sure that you get into a different or get into pitching mode when you go into fundraising. And obviously, the second part, what we can really support the startups and help them, which is quite a lot of, or can be quite a lot of effort, is that we approach a variety of investors at one point in time. So usually as a startup, you might be able to contact some VCs here and there because you get intros or you just simply contact them. Sure. With the private ones, it becomes more tricky. Some are not that accessible, or you don't even know that they exist. And at once, we really can open our large franchise of these family offices and entrepreneurs and C-level management that could potentially be investors in the company. So really take the effort away in approaching every single investor, but helping really to open the doors and to the different types of investors. I mean, we have long-standing relationships with all these investors, and sure. It's they know that we have done a very strict selection on the companies, and that increases the likelihood tremendously that they look, at an investment we show them.
Now, I would also like to talk a bit about the part, like what happens after the investment closed and how you actually work with investors. So what are investors' expectations in terms of reporting and regular information flow from the startup after you close the financing round for growth?
I would say before we go into the details, I would really like to emphasize that the importance, or that it's a huge importance to have a really good relationship with your investors. Mm-hmm. It's important to have their trust. And keep them enthusiastic and motivated about the startups, because they will be the ones, if you have a bit of a tricky situation or if you're coming up for your next round, that you want as investors again. Your existing ones are always the investors, that you will ask first when a next round is coming up. And I can tell you, having been in private equity before and being an investor myself, I can tell you how important it is to keep the trust, to make sure that your investors can trust you, because they will more easily continue to invest and continue to be your partner if there's trust. If they feel you're hiding information from them, it starts becoming tricky, and this can lead to a situation where you simply let companies down in tricky situations because you feel there is no trust. So the relationship to your investors is of utmost importance, and you need to make sure that you really have a great relationship with them. And I would rather have them more information than less. When it comes down to what are your reporting standards, usually they're set in the shareholders agreement. Mm-hmm. I think it's quarterly reporting that you send us the financials, and you probably have a bit of wording around what's going on in your business. But you can also ideally have it monthly, make sure that they're up to date and they will feel good that you keep them informed, and it's not a lot of administrative burden. It's really, they have given you money, and I think it's, as a startup, your responsibility to take good care of your investors.
That's also an important point. That's the task that you should do anyway. You should have a good understanding where you stand with your business anyway. And then it's just simply forwarding that to investors. That cannot hurt, right? Yeah, exactly. And as a CEO and CFO, think about your own reputation. You will mostly meet people twice, and if they have made a bad experience with you, they will not trust you again, whatever successful startup that is. So, and again, I totally agree to what you said, is you need to have a good understanding of your startup anyways. And so let your investors be part of it. And also, after an investor got on board and now is invested in a startup company for the growth stage, how do they actually also support the company beyond just the money that they invested in?
So there's also a difference, right? If you have, there are investors that are pure financial investors, they will be a bit more, quiet, just give their money and be quiet. And then other ones, they have their strength. So is it a former entrepreneur that can maybe help you in how you, grow your company, how you build your team structures, etc. There's maybe C-level management in a large corporate that is active in exactly the field the company's in, so can help you with maybe distribution channels or, market access and these type of things. So it really depends on the person you have on board, what type of know-how network the person, is able to give to the company.
Sure. And the last question that we actually got is, how broadly diversified should my investor base be? What is your take on this?
Well, I've seen very large cap tables and very small ones, but I would say it's rather important that you have the right investors on board that are also capable of supporting you in your next rounds and your next fundraising rounds. And I would suggest rather having a smaller cap table than 100 people cap table. It would make it really complicated if you have to do some amendments in your shareholders agreement and these type of things, and you need to get last minute decisions and then from everyone. So rather keep it small if possible. I know that's not always possible because if you need funds, then you might take a bit more on board, but rather have a smaller one.
So it's good to keep that in mind.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you would like to add that we have not talked about yet?
So no, I think we've covered quite a lot of topics, and I hope it was an informative and helpful session for the startups. Obviously, thank you very much to you. It was a very interesting and fun conversation. If there are any further questions from the startups or any of the startups would like to get in touch with us, they can visit us on ubs.com/direct investments. You'll find more information on how everything works, who we've worked with in the past, but you'll also find a way there to get in touch with us. And my team is always there to help and to support with any questions you might have. So please just don't hesitate and feel free to get in touch whenever there's need.
Verena, thank you so much for your time and the great insights. It was a pleasure talking to you, and we wish you all the best and lots of future successful fundraising rounds.
So thank you very much, Sylvan, as well. Thank you.
Before we wrap everything up and give you a sneak peek about our next episode, we would like to thank our sponsor, SBB Startup. The Swiss Railways launched their own startup program, so no matter if you're already an established company or just have an idea, they are eager to hear from you if you think that your company or your idea is a good fit to the Swiss Railways. You can get in touch with them at sbbstartup.com, and they will support you with internal connections, with coaching, and also are very interested in launching a pilot project with you. So if you think that your product or your idea or your company have the potential to collaborate with the Swiss Railways, get in touch with them at sbbstartup.com. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed the content, we would be thrilled to receive your rating on Apple Podcasts. That way you not only support Swisspreneur, but also help other entrepreneurs discovering the show and finding more valuable information on how to run their businesses. Next week, we will already be back with an all-new episode of the Swisspreneur Show, so we hope to see you again then for a new episode.